Hey guys, Charles here. This is to 2021 macro. Macro. This is set one and number one. And this is quite the problem. Assume the economy of Sweden is in long run equilibrium and has a surplus in its current account. Is the Swedish capital and financial account in deficit and surplus or in a balance? These should be fairly, if we have our current account, we have our financial account, we know that some things that we should just keep in mind here is that if our current account is in a surplus, then we have to have a deficit in our financial account. Understand that if we had had a deficit in our current account, if I could spell it correctly, we had to have a surplus in our financial account. These are nice to have in your heads because they are going to ask these questions, and we should just know anytime a surplus is in the capital, there's got to be a deficit in the financial. Anytime there's a deficit in the capital, there's a surplus in the financial. The understanding here and the explanation is the capital account plus the financial account must always equal 0. This should make sense. If this is a +2, this has to be a -2. If this is a -2, this has to be a +2. Can we see that? Let's just make sure we understand that. It's strange, not strange, but unusual that they asked us to explain that. I don't think they've ever done that before. So a bit tricky to think of it in that, how you would have explained that little piece. I think that works. That's what they gave us to understand how they wanted it explained. Best scenario. You probably could have write out some long drawn out thing, but that's the easiest way to do it right there. All right, draw a correctly labeled graph of the short run, long run, aggregate demand for Sweden. Show the current equilibrium real output YPO1. Now, they did tell us up here in the top. It's always important to read this top number one. They are in long run equilibrium. So you're really just drawing an aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve. And obviously long run aggregate supply curve showing equilibrium, long run equilibrium specifically. So we're right in that spot right there. This is going to be PL1, this is going to be Y1. Obviously real GDP on the horizontal and just price level on the vertical is fine. So we got our PY1 and our PL1. We've got all of our curves and we know we're in long run equilibrium. Good enough. C. Assume United Kingdom decreases its imports from Sweden. Now this is Sweden's aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve graph, right? Then the United Kingdom that trades with Sweden is not buying as much of Sweden's stuff. In essence, the United Kingdom is decreasing their imports, or we could say Sweden's exports are decreasing, which means we know their aggregate demand is going to go down. If aggregate demand decreases, it shifts to the left. Here's AD1, AD2. Draw in your arrows. Obviously draw Y2 here. More arrows. And then PL2, I think is what we want right there. There's your arrow. So you're showing that aggregate demand decreasing, shifting to the left. You're showing, excuse me, price level going down. You're showing output or real GDP going down also. Y2, PL2, new equilibrium price level. I think we're all good there. As a result of the decrease in the United Kingdom's imports from Sweden, would policymakers in Sweden be more concerned about cyclical unemployment or inflationary pressures? Explain. All right. Well, obviously, we're sliding into a recession here. Aggregate demand is below full employment. So I think we could clearly see that recessions cause cyclical unemployment, right? A recession does have cyclical unemployment. There is no inflation here because the price level has fallen. So, and then they want us to explain it. There's a long way to write this out, and then there's sort of that shorthanded way that we should know, right? We know that if aggregate demand, let's do it like this. Let's start with exports. If we know exports are going down, now remember this is Sweden, exports are going down, we know that's going to drive aggregate demand down. That's going to make the price level go down. That's going to make real GDP go down. That makes output go down. And if we're explaining unemployment, we have to have output. So if output's going down, I know that unemployment must be going up. Can we see that? And that's all of this I like is necessary, but those two right there have to go together. Output and unemployment is what the College Board always wants. Anytime they're asking us about unemployment, we have to refer back to output. We probably could have left our GDP out because output kind of covers that. We could have left out price level, but we definitely can't leave out aggregate demand. And it's nice to say what caused aggregate demand to go down, that initial cause of exports going down, drove down aggregate demand, made output go down, which made unemployment go up. I hope that's clear there. E, if the Swedish central bank's goal is to return the economy to long run, what open market operations? So now we're talking about the central bank means monetary policy, right? If that's monetary policy and it is open market, an open market operation is either buy bonds or sell bonds. And we know that if we're in a recession, we don't want to sell bonds. We want the Fed or the central bank to buy bonds. They don't ask us to explain it, so we don't need to. Yep, no reason to explain it. We just need to write buy bonds, and I think we're golden there. F, the currency of the, and we could obviously make sense of it, and we might as well. What we know is when the Fed or the central bank buys bonds, right, this is going to increase the money supply, driving down the nominal interest rate. Money supply increases, interest rates fall. That's going to make investment go up. That's obviously investment. Remember C plus I plus G plus XN. Investment is obviously a determinant of aggregate demand. So when investment goes up, aggregate demand goes up, price level goes up, real GDP goes up. Output obviously goes up, unemployment would go down. And that's the whole point there is the Fed is trying to get us back to long-run equilibrium. They're trying to push aggregate demand back to full employment, so they want to increase aggregate demand, making output go up and unemployment go down. I hope that makes sense. They didn't ask us to explain it, but if they had, you would want to write all of that stuff out so that you understood it. That's obviously kind of shorthand to make sense of it. Hopefully it helps. All right, let's see here. The currency of the United Kingdom is the pound. The currency of Sweden is the krona. Fitting. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the krona and show the impact of the decrease in the United Kingdom's imports from Sweden on the value of the krona in the foreign exchange market. Wow, that's a word salad, right? Draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the krona. So we should know that the foreign exchange market is just a supply and demand of what's inside the FOREX, right? It is for the krona, so krona, their symbol is KR. It is quantity of KR down here. And it is the pound. Anyway, close enough. It is the pound to the krona. Right? Draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange. And now we've got the currency is the pound, the currency, and show the impact of a decrease in imports. So think about that for a second. That means they're not buying as much, the United Kingdom is not buying as much stuff, as much Swedish stuff. So the demand for this to buy, think about that again. Let's talk about this for just a second. It's important. If the United Kingdom is not buying Swedish goods, they're not having to buy the krona to buy those goods because the Swedes only take the krona. They don't take pounds, right? You have to exchange pounds in the FOREX for kronas, and then you could buy the goods. So if they're not buying our goods, if I'm Swedish, they're not buying Swedish goods, so the demand for the krona is going down. This would be 1, this would be 2. And we see that as the demand for the krona goes down, It's obviously driving down the value of the Swedish krona. The value of the krona would go down. Now, there is two ways to show this. This is one, showing demand going down. You could have also shown supply increasing. If there's less demand for the krona, that implies that there must be more kronas in the FOREX. So the understanding here is both of these are acceptable. The value is going down. Again, you would do krona on the vertical, quantity of krona on the horizontal, and then it is whatever the other currency is, pound to krona here. E1, E2 is acceptable. Make sure you show the arrows showing what's going on. They're mostly interested in that right there, what's happening to the exchange rate. We could also call it the value. We could say the value is going down. We could say it's depreciating. We can say it's becoming weaker. Right? All of those are acceptable. Obviously, they use the word value, so I like using the word value. Easy enough. G, if the Swedish central bank's goal is to reverse the exchange rate, shown in part F, by changing the interest rate, what open market operation? So that is a very tricky question. First of all, we're used, if you've done a lot of these, we're used to the central bank either buying or selling bonds, buying or selling currency to reverse the exchange rate. But now we're talking about the central bank or the Fed by changing the interest rate. What open market operation should they use? That is a very tricky question. So let's just draw a little FOREX understanding here. Here's the UK. Here's obviously Sweden. And here's the UK's correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market for the pound. And here's Sweden's. Do I want to do? I think. Do I want to do it like this? Let's don't do it like that. Let's back up here a second. Let's understand what's happening before we do that. The understanding here should be that they want to change the interest rate. The central bank wants to change the interest rate to affect open market operations. Well, what we should know, if we're talking about the FOREX, there's a couple things that affect the foreign exchange market. One is real interest rates, right? If real interest rates are going up in Sweden, that implies they must be going down in the UK. Now, this implies, let's say the real interest rate in Sweden is 5%, whereas the real interest rate in the UK is 1%. And the question then becomes, who wants to put whose money in whose banks? If Sweden banks are paying 5%, the real interest rate being paid in Swedish banks is 5%, while it's only 1% in the UK, what we recognize is that the UK citizens would want to take their pounds and dump them into the FOREX. They'll take those pounds and dump them into the FOREX, and they'll buy Swedish krona, KR, because they want to put those kronas in the banks to get that higher real interest rate. That is going to create a higher demand. That's going to increase demand because those UK citizens have to buy Swedish krona, kronas, to be able to put them in those banks and get that high real interest rate. So the central bank has to increase the real interest rate to cause UK citizens to want to put their money into Swedish banks. So the Swedish central bank obviously needs to raise its real interest rate. I hope I said that correctly. So they would, to raise their interest rates, they would sell bonds. This is Sweden now. Sweden's central bank, or Fed, let's just call it central bank, Fed, whatever, would sell bonds. That's going to decrease the money supply when they sell bonds. That's going to increase the nominal interest rate, right? And when that nominal interest rate goes up, that also implies that the real interest rate must be going up also. These two are traveling in the same direction. So we know that the real interest rate is going up. what open market operation would they use? They would sell bonds. That is a very wordy explanation. Go back and look at some of those Forex things. It's a hard question because they kind of lead us in one direction to talk about buying currency or selling currency, and then they ask about the interest rate. Very tricky. All right, H, explain how the open market operation would reverse the change in the exchange rate. Again, this is the understanding here that as these UK citizens notice the higher real interest rate in Sweden, they're going to sell their currency in the Forex and buy Corona. As they buy Corona, we could draw and recognize that the demand for the Corona is going to increase because of those high real interest rates. More people are going to want to buy it, and that is going to drive up the value. That's going to drive up the value of the Corona. And that is still pounds to Corona. All right, I hope that makes sense. And we could explain it. I like using the graph here, but you could also explain it using this right here. As the Swedish Fed or Swedish central bank sells bonds, the money supply would decrease, driving up the real interest rates. As real interest rates go up, more UK citizens will buy more Corona. The demand for the Corona would increase and drive up the value of the Corona. I think that works. That's the exchange in the exchange rate. Yeah, because here the exchange rate's going down, here it's going up. All right, and you just have to write that out. All right, guys, that's a very, very long question. Hope everything's fine. Let me know what's going on. Be safe. Bye.